Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Breaking Point podcast. Today, we are here with Thomas J. LeGrave Jr., aka Tom. That's what I'm going to call him because his official name is too long to be saying all the time. And Tom is, well, first of all, let's start off with you're the author of a book, which I can see behind you, which I've written down Special Warfare, Social Warfare. Great name. Really want to get into what that means. But why don't you tell people a very, very short, because I am interested in your past, but there's also other things we can talk about. And I think your past will seep into some of the other questions that I ask. So tell people just a very short, truncated version of your life.
Yeah, I was in the military from 19 to 29. I ended up going into the military, bringing an addiction. I started using drugs at 14. Went in the military, brought them with me. At that time, it wasn't a big deal. It became zero tolerance. 9 years after my entry into the military, I was discharged for drug use. Ended up going to a recovery facility and finding that I had to live life differently. And I, at that time, couldn't figure that out because I was told, you know what, in your childhood, your issues that you take into adulthood started there. And I couldn't remember childhood. I was numb to everything. So I came up with the idea of I'm going to go work with youth that are the age I am, or they're the age I was when I started. And so I took a job at an adolescent recovery facility. I did that for 4 years. And then I went and took another job at a boys and girls club. And between that 8-year period, I found out that I could live life without drugs. I found out that I had a gift working with young people, and I took it as because of them giving, as I saw it, my life back in the form of living it without drugs and alcohol. I committed myself to working with youth. The education, I got the bachelor's, master's license, board certification. All that is so that I had the information that when a young person shared with me something that was, that was overwhelming them, I couldn't handle not having an answer. So with the education and the experience came the ability to interact in the way I wanted to with youth. So I'm at the end of my career. I'm what's called a licensed clinical social worker. I have a private practice. Over the last 30 years, I've worked with the adult population and with adolescents that are transitioning from adolescence to adulthood, 18 to 19, 20-year-olds. And that's what brings me sitting here with you. And that's it in a nutshell.
No, that's a perfect recount, actually. Got everything. Gave me a good basis. 14, that's pretty early to become addicted to things, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Within reason, what are you comfortable talking about? But what was going on at 14? Where did you end up?
Well, here's the thing is, when I was 14, this was 1974.
Yeah,
So
it's like a 26-year-old nowadays, isn't it, really? What you're doing at 14.
So here's the thing is, at that time, it was called latchkey kids. And it was when earlier than 14, my father was the breadwinner. My mom stayed home to raise the kids. Well, as time progressed, it took two incomes. So mom had to go to work too. And at that time, mom was at work, dad's at work, and the boys, I have two brothers, are partying and smoking marijuana and living life and having a wonderful time.
Yeah.
Now, in that age group, I've come to find that the experimentation, you have to define whether a young person is experimenting with drugs or if there's an addiction. And that's a fine line. And for me, I believe that within a very short period of time, by the age of 15, I was an addict. And the problem with it is that it wasn't any kind of big deal. It didn't cost me anything at that point.
What, as in because do you mean financially, or in the sense of you had no responsibility in your life, so therefore there were no adverse effects?
Exactly. So I'm going to school. I'm getting good grades. I'm playing sports. My father's happy. My mother's happy, but they don't know what we're doing without their knowledge. And that is where it started. It became, and in our family, everybody's in recovery. My parents, when they were alive, my brothers, everyone is in recovery because for us, it wasn't experimentation, it became addiction and all the negative that comes with that.
Wow. Well, that's a good point that you sort of alighted upon, where you said when you're like 15 and when you're young, there aren't any tangible drawbacks as such because you're so young. And that made me think nowadays, and probably as I'm speaking to you, just forever, young people often engage in things that they don't realize what the potential outcomes are in the future because there's nothing to contrast. There's not like, oh, I've got a wife and kids or a job that I have to uphold as such. You're more protected, but also when you're like a young teenager, your just conceptualization of the world isn't what it is going to be eventually. So you can't really, I don't know. It was just as you were thinking, I was like, when young people get addicted to things now, when they're 15, they don't understand what they're doing until they get older. But unfortunately, the problem with when you become older is the damage is done at some point, at least temporarily. Was that one of the reasons why you enrolled in the army? Is that what you call it in America?
Navy.
Navy.
Yeah.
I knew that. You're a SEAL, aren't you? I was going to get onto that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You're a SEAL.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it was at the age of 18, I'm still living in my father's house. And at that point, they wised up. My parents caught on. And I was getting high with my younger brother, I was 18, he was 14. And the old man threw me out of the house. And at that point, at 18, I'm like, I'm not going back to his house. I'm ready to go live life. And at that time, the only thing that was really there was the military. 1975, America ended their war in Vietnam. I went in 1979 at a time where nobody wanted to be in the military. So I actually got a good deal, everything that I asked for. I wanted the Navy. I wanted to be a hospital corpsman, a medic. And so I was given everything that I asked for. But here's the caveat. When I went in, I brought my addiction. The military did not create the addiction. I brought it with me. And again, so at that time frame, the morale in the U.S. military in the late 1970s was horrible. The war in Vietnam just took its toll. And so in not a very short time, but within my first enlistment, it became so that they were no longer accepting that you could use drugs. The military will always let you drink. Drinking is part of that culture. But at that point, I didn't catch on fast enough to see that the old days were gone and the new days were drink, no drugs. And I ended up getting popped on a urinalysis, like I said, in the 9th year of my military, and that ended the career.
So you were doing drugs for 9 years in the military and functioning as a Navy SEAL, presumably at some point. At what point my knowledge on the armed forces, as you've witnessed, is not brilliant. But how does that occur? Are you called up? Do you enroll?
When I had no idea when I went in the military what a Navy SEAL was, absolutely clueless. Turns out in the 3rd week, you can take a screening test and it's, you run, you swim, pull-ups, push-ups. And if you pass it, they will take you from boot camp. And after you go to your A school, after I became a hospital corpsman, they sent me to what's called basic underwater demolition SEAL training. And I was in what was class 106. I started in August and I graduated 6 months later in February 29th, 1980, and was given just the most awesome opportunities that a young alpha male couldn't ask for. I got to carry guns and blow things up.
Yeah.
What 19, 20-year-old don't want to do that?
Yeah, no, it's true. There's a YouTuber that I watched who applied to be, it probably was the Navy, I think, when he was younger. And he went to like I don't know what the correct terminology would be. Maybe like, I don't want to say taster session, but that's the only thing that can come to my mind. And the guy at the front of the room said, "We all know why we're here, boys." He said, "We're here to," I think he said something like shoot guns and to fuck women. And he was like, "Yeah, that's why I'm here." So yeah, I mean, that is a 19, 20-year-old. That's what's going through your mind. So
absolutely.
that makes complete sense, and the status that comes with being all that, and all the benefits that come with that. So let's talk. We'll talk a little about your career, and then we obviously need to get into what you're doing now. And I need to ask about your book because I've got some questions on that. But how did you find being in the Navy and being in an elite branch of the Navy, I guess, in the context of your addiction as well, because that's really interesting as well. Did I freeze?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. How did you manage being in the Navy, and how was that within the context of your addiction? How did you
Yeah, there you go.
juggle
So
those two things?
now the manner in which you get caught doing drugs is a urinalysis. You pee in a bottle and they test it. So as a hospital corpsman, the command would call where I'm working, me, and say, get the bottles ready. We're going to have a test. And so ahead of time, I knew it was coming. So I could make let the necessary other guys know, and have a bottle set aside with somebody who wasn't hot. And I put my name on it. So I was able to have control. Now, with addiction, I don't care what it is, it eventually consumes you. And what started out was able to operate as a Navy SEAL and still party pretty hard and be able to carry both of those. As time progressed, I started getting sloppy. I started making mistakes. I started forgetting that there were other responsibilities that I should have been focusing on, and I wanted to party. And in the 9th year, I ended up falling asleep and not waking up for 3 days. And in the military, that's called unauthorized absence. So I come back and they sit me down and say, here's the bottle. I don't know it's coming. I can't control it. And I come up hot, and that's it. Party over.
Wow, yeah. So that's you mentioned the word responsibility, and obviously not only is your tolerance and your need for more of the drugs, your tolerance is decreasing. No, your tolerance is increasing, so therefore you need more of the drugs, but also I imagine your responsibility is on the up the more you're in. So you've got these two things that are sort of these two ships, I guess, that are about to converge on one another and crash. And that was your crashing point, was when that moment came along.
Very good
Okay.
analogy.
Yeah. And so you were a medic. So why did you decide what made you want to be a medic? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I always I can remember wanting to be a doctor at 8 or 9 years old. That's what I was going to do when I grew up. And then I got derailed with getting thrown out of the house for drug use, and ended up in the military, where they gave me the opportunity to be educated, and thoroughly educated. I spent a lot of time being educated in the field of medicine. That is, when you're a solo, what's called a corpsman, and I'm attached with a platoon of SEALs, and I'm the medic. So they made sure my education was all that. And it was, again, early on, fulfilling the responsibility was I could do that. It was in time that I lost that ability. And no matter how educated you are, no matter how talented you are, it doesn't matter, because what you were, you're no longer. In the attic, all that you're thinking about is yourself and where you're going to get your high. And that is a dangerous component when you're in the military doing what I did.
Yeah, of course. That's ironic in a unfortunate way. You're responsible for the lives of other people, so you have to be really on your game. You're looking after people in some of the most dire, potentially life-threatening situations. So therefore, you really have to know your stuff, but also be aware of what's going on. So you clearly are a compassionate person, because you wanted to go into the medical side and the caring side of the Navy and the armed forces. And that is obviously led on to what it is that you're doing now. So when you got when you were dismissed, what was the next thing you did immediately after that? What was your next move?
So let's set the mindset. At that time, I am emotionally, mentally, physically damaged.
Mm-hmm.
I for the what I did as a hospital corpsman, Navy SEAL, that was an identity. That's all I knew. There was no separating me from that. And when I was separated from the military, that was devastating. I was overwhelmed, and I have an addiction that is killing me. And I now have no support system, and I have no clue as to how to stop the use in the manner I was using it. So I went home to the same house, to the same father that threw me out 10 years earlier. And this time he said, look, I'll take you back, but you got to go take care of this issue. And so the deal was, if I stayed he'd let me stay in his house if I went and addressed the addiction. 4 months after my discharge, I was in a 90-day recovery facility. It was called Project 90. And it was the new journey. I began anew creating, because I couldn't go back. I was not allowed to go back to the military to do a job I loved. So now I got to figure out how to live life and do in what the military. I went in at 19, and that's all I knew. The civilian world that everybody else had been living made sense to them, made no sense to me. So what it came down to is I started working at I completed a 90-day recovery facility. And then, like I shared, I had about a year and it was going to fall apart. And I made the decision to take a job working with youth. And I did not take that job to go help kids. I wanted to take that job to help me. I needed to see it with my own eyes. And then through their emotions, I learned to find my emotions. And in doing that, they gave me the greatest gift that I have ever received. And that was the compassionate, caring that they put trust in me, that I had none of that for myself.
Yeah. And I used to work with sort of minor special needs children a bit when I was a little bit younger. I'm not that old, but a bit younger. And I think what you said is absolutely true about, there's something about the sort of raw state of children that they reflect back to you aspects of yourself, and you can sort of look at what they're doing and go, oh, that's interesting. I can relate to that. And if you scale that up, you get the way an adult might react, but that's how a child is reacting. And if they just did that, they would react differently, and maybe I could do the same. And all this, the sort of whirlwind of a new revelations as you're witnessing them react. I imagine that was very therapeutic for you. Yes. And for them, obviously.
Yeah, because to me, the loss of my military career, this is how I'm thinking. What I did and the manner in which I left the military was, I betrayed a sacred trust, a brotherhood of like men that did a very specific job. And that betrayal overwhelmed me long after I started getting sober. It wasn't until years later that I could finally figure out how to forgive myself for that. And again, it came from my extensive work with young people. It was they who came to me, trusting me, that I finally figured out how to trust myself. So,
yeah. And that's what addiction, I've spoken to people in the past who know people who are very close to people who are alcoholics, and the only way they can describe an addiction is that it is like the devil. It is just its ability to cloud your entire mind, body, from every cell is just phenomenal, and the things that it'll make you do. Have you had any, because there's lots of talk about like addiction, and there's a guy who wrote a book, I think, called Lost Connections. I think it's Johan, maybe it's something along the lines. And his sort of ideology was that an addiction is like a maladaptive connection, or it's like it's a half connection. So people are trying to recreate a genuine connection with something that is disingenuine, I guess, or isn't faulty. Have you had any revelations on not just why you potentially went down that route, or not went down that route implies that you chose it, but you were unfortunately found yourself down that road? And then also, have you had any revelations about just addiction in general and the way that we conceptualize it, if we get anything wrong or right, what we get wrong and right?
Yeah, excellent question. From where I'm standing today, this person that's talking to you, I can look back over the last 40 years and I can see that had it not been for those experiences, getting thrown out of father's house, getting thrown out of the military, and reestablishing my life, I'm not sitting here like this with you.
Mm.
Now, I couldn't see it 20, 30 years ago looking forward, but I can see it looking back. And I am forever grateful that those who held me accountable when I was not accountable, I am forever grateful that they had the courage to say, we're going to let you go. There's nothing that we want to do with you out. And I'm today grateful.
So, okay, so you're putting a spin on it of what happened to you was exceptionally misfortunate, but it's led you down the path for you to help other people. So in some
Yes.
sense, it was,
Yes.
we've spoken about it before with someone else, but it wasn't necessarily worth it, but it was the best outcome that could occur.
Yes. And here I sit. And this person, I like this one better than I've liked any of the other ones in the past.
Really? Oh, that's good. Let's talk about your book, and particularly this is, I haven't obviously I haven't been able to read it, but I've read little aspects of you potentially speaking about or speaking about parts of it. Are you saying that there's a correlation, or not correlation, but a similarity between special warfare and then social warfare? What do you mean by combining those two terms?
Okay. It's special welfare,
Welfare, even.
social warfare. So
Oh, I get what you mean. Yeah, yeah.
here's
Okay.
the thing is the book was written as a vehicle so that I could get into the national eye to have a conversation to say that America's youth today are being overwhelmed and there's nothing that we can give them that they need because of the way the adult population is so angry at one another and so fearful. I wrote the thing just because I wanted this opportunity to talk about America's youth.